Christian parenting.
Today we're talking sibling rivalry with marriage and family therapist Brian Neal.
Each child is unique. Trying more and more and more to show them that they are unique. Instead of them trying to be like their brother or sister, you're really teaching them that they are unique. And that even though right now it may not seem fair, but they have other unique things that are going to happen, and they're going to get things that the others may not get because they have unique characteristics.
Hey, my name is Jay Holland, and this is Let's Parent on Purpose. It's a podcast to help you thrive and not just survive your parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your family, or your personal walk with Jesus. And if you find it helpful, I encourage you to subscribe, share it with your friends, and you're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find all kinds of past articles, issues, and resources to help your family. As we continue to roll through our Parenting Challenge series, this is one of my most requested topics when I ask mom and dads what to address, and that is sibling rivalry. I'm joined today by Brian Neal. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist. He owns True Course Counseling. It's in the state of Delaware. He used to be in Florida. That's how we knew one another. We talked today about what sibling rivalry is, some of the motivations behind it. We go into some general practices and strategies to help with sibling rivalry, and then I get into specific questions that have been sent to me, everything from the bossy child over parenting child, what is fair versus what is equal, and how do you deal with that, different ways that you help, if especially like on the boy side where there's this continuing fight for dominance, just some really good practical help for you as you navigate probably a decade or two potentially of sibling rivalry. Before we jump into it, I do want to give a quick thank you to a couple new Patreon supporters, Letitia Brooks and Anna Horton. I very, very much appreciate your continued support. This is a longer episode, so I'm going to just jump right into it, but I do appreciate it. And if you're dealing with sibling rivalry, you're going to want to stick around all the way through as we answer questions right to the end. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Brian. Brian Neal, it's so good to have you back on Let's Parent on Purpose. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Jay.
Yeah, I think the last time you were on, we were talking about unstacking the stack of stress. And so you've got to put that into practice as you guys moved states during the middle of a pandemic. How's your stress level?
Yeah, it's better now, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, right in the middle of the pandemic, nothing like taking on some additional stress of relocating and finding a new home and all of that. But yeah, it's been quite a year for sure, 2020, and really got to put that into practice.
Yeah. So speaking of stress and the pandemic, I think it has exacerbated a situation that happens in most households that have more than one child. And it's something that's kind of been around since right after Adam and Eve ate the wrong fruit. And that's sibling rivalry. So I've had a number of conversations with moms and dads when I ask, what are some topics that you would really like me to hit? And just kind of a deluge of sibling rivalry. And especially as kids have been on top of one another, and so many of them in virtual school with a lot of their extracurricular activities gone, just parents really looking for some help there. And so I thought, nobody I know better than Brian to bring on this. So thanks for coming to offer your wisdom on it. You'll fix everybody's problems. That's what we're thinking.
I don't know about that, but I know that COVID, we could just start with that because it's been a crazy time. And I just would want to encourage everyone, especially parents, that have kids at home. It's not normal in terms of the environment, and to be able to give yourself some grace, give your kids some grace, and we'll talk more about it, but just using this as a teachable moment for our kids is the best we can do, but knowing that we are going to have to give each other grace. I mean, you can't be pent up for this long
Right.
under these conditions. It's really an abnormal condition, and we've in the counseling world we're kind of calling it COVID fatigue, and it's kind of this thing that's been you can do it for a month or 2 months or 3 months, but once you get over where we are now, 9 to 10 months, it's just a lot. And so hopefully, as we talk about sibling rivalry, we can kind of talk about some things that hopefully will help you at home during this time.
Yeah, reminding us that things are not normal. I remember having a conversation with Eliza Huey on screen time, and she wrote a book even on like helping, raising kids in a screen-saturated world. And one of the things I remember from that conversation was her saying, "Look, normal rules don't necessarily apply right now with screen time and screen limits. Like you just got to give grace because when all of these other activities are not available and it's freezing cold outside
Right.
and you're on top of each other, probably your kids are going to be on more screens than they've ever been before." And she's like, "But just don't worry. Like they won't stay that way. When,
Right.
when
Right.
things get to be a little more normal, you get to go back some." So regarding sibling rivalry, would you help us out? Maybe just let's have a baseline definition. What are we talking about when we talk about sibling rivalry?
Yeah, I mean, I would define it as, it's that jealousy, competition, and then fighting between, brothers and sisters. It's that intense, it's more of an intense emotion, if you will, that comes out sometimes as fighting, sometimes as seclusion, though. I mean, so it really is this, again, it kind of encompasses all three of those areas.
Yeah. Do you feel like this is the closer your kids are together in age, the higher likelihood that this is going to be a major issue for a long period of time in your house?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, from my own personal experience. So, as you know, we adopted two young boys, and they are within 6 months of each other.
Oh, wow.
So they're non-biological, and so that in itself has really shown me, how yes, the closer they are, it can, contribute to the problem. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because they're close, you're going to have more sibling rivalry versus two that are further apart. And we'll probably get into this later, but you could have an older child and a younger child. If the younger child is needing more attention from mom and dad, you may get that sibling rivalry. It's going to look a little different. It may not look like fights, but it may look a little different where that older child is pulling away or possibly, coming back with quick responses when they normally would be more calm. So it doesn't always fit that way, but yes, I would say, and many times, the closer together, then that's when you're going to see some of that.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you see contribute on a normal basis to sibling rivalry?
Well, we talked about the first one, so birth order for sure, right? And so, I mean, you and I and most of the people listening have probably seen this before, where mom and dad come home from the hospital with a new baby boy or girl, and brother or sister is, yeah, they may or may not be so happy about that. So, birth order in itself surely contributes to it. Personality differences. Again, whether it's biological or non-biological, can play a big role, but personality differences. I mean, I've got 6 kids total. I've got 4 biological, 2 adopted, and I can tell you every single one has a different personality. And depending on what day of the week it is and under what circumstance, especially when we look at COVID, you're going to see these personality differences really come out, and that's when they start, banging their heads together. And so personality differences for sure. Selfishness. Let's face it, we're all sinners. We're all kind of brought into this world, as you said from the beginning of time with Adam and Eve, and we've got it's selfishness inside, and sometimes we just want what we want, or we want something that somebody else has, or we want more attention from somebody. It's more than just a need. It's a selfishness that's inside us, and we just have to acknowledge that sometimes. And the other is a crisis. Sometimes there's a crisis or an extreme event I remember when we adopted our kids, and before that, we were actually doing foster care. And so when we would bring either a foster child, and certainly when we adopted the boys, there was a dynamic change. That's a big event in a family's life when you have four other biological, and now we're bringing in two other siblings, like immediately almost. It changes that dynamic. And so you really got to be looking out for and seeing what the impact is. The same with like mental health or even a physical ailment. If all of a sudden now that child is requiring a lot more of your time, so kind of a little different than a newborn baby, which is kind of what I consider a normal event, but still a new event for a sibling. If you take a child and bring him into your home, or they end up having mental illness or physical illness, a lot of time and effort can be taken away from the other child, and they see that, and they'll that can start a sibling rivalry where hey, that person's getting more than their fair share.
Yeah, and I think especially in that case, if you have a special needs child, there can be a quiet resentment that builds in the other kids. And one of those resentments being there's a whole different level of expectation of me versus the other one. I know that's one that we've had to wrestle through at different times in our home, and I've talked to other parents that do the same way. It's like your kid's not. We're all sinful. Your quote normal children are not any more bad because they resent the special needs situation, but they can it's actually something where they can feel bad for resenting it, and it kind of pushes them deeper into isolation or anger or bitterness, because sometimes it's really hard. Like if there's a sad story in the house, it can be really hard for that child to process. Honestly, it's hard for mom and dads to process. We can resent the plate that we have to walk through, much less if our children are still developing and they have such a heavy weight put on them.
Yeah, and many times that resentment and sibling rivalry, which is interesting. I recently counseled a family, and they had a child that had since left the home, which demanded a lot of attention and time and effort and discipline. And the younger sibling really started to come out with a lot of anger and frustration after that child left, because he kind of felt like he was invisible during that time of crisis. And so I think for parents who find themselves in that situation, to really being able to try to pull the balance back to center as much as they can during those times is really important. And like you said, you may not see it. It may be a quiet, resentful, almost like a seclusion, or backing away, a withdrawal from the family, as well as much as it is might be acting out in a very outward way. So
yeah, and I think sometimes all you can do is be as honest as you can with your children and say, hey, I see this, I acknowledge this. I can imagine if I was in your shoes, that these are some of the feelings that I would be feeling. And, I want you to know that we're really proud of you. And yes, this is a heavy load. This is the load that the Lord has chosen for us to walk through, but we want you to feel supported. We want you to have a voice. And so sometimes you have to give them permission to complain. Some kids, you don't have to give any permission to complain at all. They're natural. But some of them, you need it to come out, because they may gloss it over with perfectionism on the outside, but a real deep-seated resentment can start growing on the inside there.
Yeah. And Jay, one of the things that we can do to help that situation, and it really applies to whether or not you're in, again, a crisis mode or a non-crisis mode, or even in the COVID mode, as I would say, is really start to try to have some dedicated time with each of the children. I mean, at the end of the day, kids want to be loved. They want to participate. And if they feel like they're not, and they don't have that ability, or they're, this whole thing about fair versus equal, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but, to be able to set the time aside, and to have those, maybe it's a daddy-daughter date, or maybe it's, mom goes out with her son and just has that dedicated time, and where you can ask them, how are you? right? And they can tell you, but they're probably going to tell you in a quiet moment as opposed to the middle of the living room where everybody's screaming at each other.
Right.
So to be able to have that quiet moment, have that dedicated time with each of the kids, and I know that's not easy. Like I said, I've had obviously a number of kids in the house at one time, and but I can tell you when you start to have and really push yourself, and that's going to take both parents to make it happen sometimes. Or if you're a single mom or a single dad, pushing and having a friend watch your kids even for an hour. We're not talking like all day events here. We're just talking about some quiet time with each child where their personality differences and you can really sit in that place and have a good conversation because you're having dedicated time with them.
Yeah, that's really good. And I've noted this is just a little trick that can help in that. If you can schedule it ahead of time and you can announce it ahead of time, sometimes even though you don't have a long time, it feels more meaningful. And the same way with dates. I know periods where my wife and we just have such limited time to focus on each other, but it may only be an hour in the whole week that like it's just a crammed crazy week, but we have it blocked so we can look forward to it. So we're kind of getting the joy of it even before it happens with the anticipation, and then it's much more meaningful. And I think the same thing can happen with with kids. One of my kids, one of my sons, he wants to just go to McDonald's, before school. And I'm like, oh, come on, really? McDonald's? But,
right.
Because it tears me up. I don't have to eat at McDonald's. So, we just leave a little bit early, especially if we can announce it ahead of time. I've noticed if it's a random spur of the moment thing that day, it feels like it doesn't count as much. But if like we've announced it even the day before or something like that, then he gets up, he gets ready more on time. We split driving the kids to school. And we just sit in the parking lot at McDonald's and he eats his breakfast burritos and he'll chat away. So that like just give a little bit of thought towards it. It doesn't have to be a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, another good example of that is it doesn't always have to be the parents either.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a good example. So my one of our daughters, who's staying with us until she leaves to go into the mission field, is so she's staying with us and she's 21. And what's really neat is on Mondays she takes our two boys to the coffee shop where they get a bagel. And so it's scheduled. It's every Monday because that's her day off. So every Monday they are super excited, right, to go with their older sister. They're 6, she's 21, and they're going to go to the coffee shop where she gets coffee all the time, and they're going to sit there and have these really cool bagels and just have some, sister time. So again, now we're using siblings within the whole family dynamic to bring, siblings together. So it doesn't always have to be on mom and dad. If there's an older sibling, or even if a sibling is, I would say, even 5 or 6 years older, they can still kind of take a lead role.
Yeah.
So now they're looking at, hey, you know what? I get to step up and I get to take care of, my brother or sister on this particular day doing whatever this event is. So it doesn't always have to be mom and dad. And I think that takes a little bit of pressure off.
That's really helpful. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, really like that. So let's just pivot full bore into strategies in general to help with Sibling Rivalry, and then we will go into some particular questions I've been given. So we know that the Bible, Philippians 2:3-4 says, "Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also the interest of others." So one, that's a great verse. Just even to encourage your family to memorize together. But we know it says don't go after things with rivalry and conceit, but look to others more important than yourself. But can you help us out with some maybe particular strategies or tools that can help us to address this as it comes up?
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at that though for a minute, because what it's saying is you kind of want to look at what's the opposite, right? So what's the opposite of rivalry or conceit, and if it's in being humble with each other, to me that brings forth what Jesus really wanted us to do, and that is to treat your neighbor as yourself, and to really, to me, that's a serving, that's a selfless type of attitude, and our kids are only going to know what they know from what they see around them. Personality aside, some are quieter and some are more boisterous, and you might even say some are kinder than others. But at the end of the day, it's about us being able to teach them. And so I would really call on parents to try to put themselves in that mode. And so how do you, teach your kids about why it's even important? Why do they have a sibling? Why did God do this for us? Why are they in this situation? What can they do for each other? So they can care for each other, right? And we can teach that by, again, getting them involved in different things, stepping inside when they do have conflict, serving each other, right? And again, you can do that by, if a good example is, so they're setting the table. Well, if one is setting the table, they are setting the table to help the other one. And if all of a sudden you see where they're only setting their own table, right, and they're not giving the fork and the spoon and the plate and the napkin to their little brother or their big brother, you can say, hey, we're helping everybody. Go ahead and set up your the plate for your brother Johnny. So we're getting to that serving mode, but you have to kind of redirect them sometimes and kind of teach them that what the purpose of even having a sibling is. Learning from each other. Especially true, right now, my boys are again 6 and 6.5. And we were playing this game the other day, Sorry. And so one is like, he's on it. Like he's got this thing down. And the other is still kind of figuring out how this thing works. And so to get them to help each other during a simple board game, again, it takes some of the energy, if you will, off the parents, so we can help each other and really teach them, hey, that's what you're here for. We take care of family, we take care of each other. And so maybe you could help instead of being frustrated with your brother who's taken too long. Maybe you could help him. Maybe, why don't you move it for him on the other side of the board for him? So really kind of helping each other and learning from each other. And then, just being a witness, right? We talk about what it's like to be, to be saved and to be, to believe in who Jesus is, and they go to Sunday school, but are they living it out at home? Hey, wow, good job. That's what Jesus would want you to do. Or, hey, let's talk about that. Do you think that's hard, or what don't you understand? So being able to be a witness for each other, I think is especially important. So, acts of kindness is again a good example. Just being able to teach them to do that, to be kind. It's not something that comes natural. It was interesting last night. So my two boys, again, they'll get into these situations for sure, right? They are very close in age. They are non-biological. So they'll get into like this. It seems like, wow, they are really fighting today. And we go in there and we're trying to resolve this. I mean, because we're doing this, I don't know about you, Jay, but I'm living this out right now.
Yeah.
And what's so cool to hear though is last night they went to a Bible study together at our church, and it was at night. And we were trying to coach the younger one to get more involved in the games. And the older one, again, only 6 months older, he took, and I heard him in the backseat as we're driving up, and I'm like, yeah, don't forget to like get involved tonight and play that game, and the other one's like, hey, you know what? If you want, I'll be on your same team. Or you know what? If you do it, I'll root you on from the sidelines because I know you can do it. And I was like, wow, what a moment, right? What a parent moment. We're going to put that over here in our little parent bottle here and just savor it, right? But I think just encouraging that, like it's kind of cool to hear it. But man, you got to be like pouring on that and really encouraging that type of thing. And I think, at the end of the day, those they really are saved up by people. I mean, you and I know that our positive experiences, create energy, if you will, for us to try to get through the tough stuff. If it's all tough and we're constantly just trying to, discipline, then as siblings, they're going to see that, and they're going to start to see that other child as just a troublemaker, as a problem in my life, as, oh, I can't get over this person. But if you start to grab those positive moments and really encourage each other, I think it starts to build some momentum.
Let's Parent on Purpose has always been about equipping moms and dads to build thriving families centered around the hope of the gospel. If you regularly listen to this podcast, you're actually among a community of parents that spans 68 countries, including many in the 1040 window, where there are few churches and limited access to the gospel. As the amount of content I produce over the years grows, so do the cost of maintaining, storing, and producing all of the different details that help make this show helpful. If God has put you in a place where you might be able to help a little bit and support this work, would you please consider going to letsparentonpurpose.com/support and either giving a one-time gift or becoming a regular supporter through Patreon? If you're not in a good place to support the show, that's fine. I pray you continue listening, growing, and sharing it with others. That's it. No hard push. Just a simple request that if you're able to and would like to, help share the load of the show at www.letsparentonpurpose.com/support. So often I have a lot to do. I work all day and then I come home and there's a tremendous amount of household tasks to do and other things that I have to take care of. And so the default tends to be, if my kids are doing well or if they're playing good, I'm happy and I leave them be. And then when they start the conflict, I'm really disgruntled, first off, because it interrupts what I was going to do. So like they have inconvenienced me, and then I pour out my emotions on them for that. And like, I don't want them to fight with each other, but there's a selfish motivation in there as well. Of like, I don't want to have to waste my time and energy doing this. But that strategy of catching them doing good, of cheering on the things that you want, I think is so underrated and underused by moms and dads. Because the other thing with it is it can change, not only can it change them, but can also change your mindset, because otherwise we can go into this, my kids are fighting all the time. They only do this all the time. But if instead of running that narrative in your head, if you're like, you know what, my children, they do fight, but they don't fight all the time. They actually do good things sometimes. And so you start catching the things that you want them to repeat and you praise them for it. And man, I don't know if you just keep a bag of Skittles in your pocket and every time you see them do good, stick a Skittle in their mouth. I'm not sure if they might be obese when they're done, but they'll at least like each other and be kind. But that it's so important, Brian, the catching them doing good, praising what you want to see. You think about it, the way we train pets is not by punishing them when they do the wrong thing, but by praising and rewarding and reinforcing when they do the right thing. So like a well-disciplined dog is not a dog that's fearful of its master. It's a dog that does the right thing when it's supposed to. And hopefully that would be the same thing for our children.
Well, it's using that same example again. I'll just jump off of that with the dog. Is you are super intentional to watch the behavior. We're almost entertained by the behavior, and then we reward the behavior. Right? You're right. We don't follow it around waiting for it to do something wrong and then try to discipline it. So we are super intentional, and I think that's probably the word that I would use to describe the process that you just talked about, because I think myself included, you have to be super intentional, because as you said, we're as moms and dads and people that are working and doing all the other tasks that we need to get done. We have to be super intentional to almost lift us out of that spot, because and sometimes it's just that we got to move from where we are, right? Because if you're at the kitchen table and you're working and the kids are starting to have this argument or whatever, it's easy to just turn around and yell, "Hey, stop it!" Or "Hey, if you don't stop it, you're not going to get whatever," right? But it takes a lot more energy and time and intentionality to get up, go to their level, right? And look at them and say, "Hey guys, this is what we need to do." Or, "Hey, how about you can redirect," right? So you don't always have to discipline. Sometimes it's just, "Hey, how about you go in this room? I'll help you set up this. You can be over here." Two kids don't have to play together all the time. Sometimes there's that moment that you just have to "Hey, you know what? Let's do this over here." That's two things. One, it redirects the behavior. And two, it gives each of them a little bit of your time. You can sit with one and say, "Hey, let's do this. And then I'll be right back. I'm going to show John over here. I'm going to set him up over here." You have just given each one some dedicated time, which I know they like, right? And you've diffused the situation. And then later you can talk about how, that was a better way to do it than you guys fighting, right? And they start to see it.
And by doing that, you also didn't jump into their fight as well.
Right.
So that was a big deal of de-escalating. We go to Baltimore most summers with our youth group, and we're working with a lot of inner city kids that have broken homes, and they're just very quick to fight. And we realize we have very limited authority with them, and so just the thing that we preach to our teens over and over again, because we do every evening we do a debrief. It's always de-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. So let's think through ahead of time. What are some of the strategies that we know certain things are going to come up? So how can we be prepared to de-escalate these situations? So we don't want to confront the children as little as possible, because we're trying to win them to our side so that we can win them to the Lord. And I've realized, man, that is so helpful in my home. And so instead of becoming the most dominant, angry person in the argument when two kids are fighting with one another, I'm training them to de-escalate and to redirect. And I really love that. So that's a really good strategy. All right, so let's hit some specific questions that were thrown at me. So one of these is, my oldest and youngest are both boys. It seems like the youngest is constantly in a man competition with his brother. He has to be stronger and has to be better than his brother. What do you do in a situation like that? Now, I've got boys 18 months apart. I'm right there with this question. Help.
Yeah, well, I think they're definitely, they want your time, right? And they also want to make sure that they're staking their position, right? Which is normal. And one's like, hey, you know what? The older is going to dominate over the younger. And I think just being able to create activities that allow them to both be who they are. Obviously, the age difference is, you got to figure out what activity that is. But it's almost like you want to neutralize the situation. You want to take away control from one and just give it to both. And I think finding an activity that you can do with both of them, where they can both be their own person, then you're almost immediately diffusing the rivalry, if you will, and the competition. It's not about competition. That older person doesn't have to win over the other, because it's an activity that doesn't require a winning over the other. And, that's, to me, is probably the best thing to do. That could be like something as simple as, going for a hike and searching for something on the hike. It's not like, oh, I beat you. It's really like, hey, I found this. Wow, awesome. What did you find? Well, I found this over here. Now we've really kind of neutralized the need for control from that older child.
Yeah, that's helpful. My brother was 7 years older than me, so he just solved it by being way bigger than me and everything. And so not a lot of man competition when, we're boxing each other, and it's just real easy for him to punch me in the face. So I don't suggest that as the strategy for everybody else.
Right.
So here's another one that this comes up. This was asked by somebody else, but this comes up in my house a lot with one of my kids in particular. Just the concept of fair versus equal. Like, the number of times that I hear that's not fair. Right. Is just exhausting. So can you help us out? What are some ways that we can handle when those things are shouted?
Yeah, I think sometimes just understanding what is fair and what is equal, to me, fairness is really how that child has taken it to their heart. Like, it's not fair. That's almost an emotional cry for, I'm upset, I'm sad. Yeah, I might be angry. That they're having difficulty understanding the situation, versus equal. A lot of parents, we'll just make it equal. Equal to me is like a mathematical equation. All right, you get 50%, the other person gets 50%. Equal is good in some cases, but generally when you're talking about sibling rivalry, equal isn't always that easy, right? Because every child is unique. So I would say, fairness is really trying to educate them, teach them that it's not about being fair. It's about what you're asking for, and can your need be met? What do you need right now? How can I help you? I know you don't feel like this is fair. Well, he gets to go out with sister on Monday to get a bagel and I don't. Well, that's because that's their time. But you know what? Let's do something for you. You don't want to get caught up in the argument of fair versus unfair. You say, as a parent, you want to try to figure out, what does he want? What does he or she want? And how can you help him with that? And again, it's almost like you're deflecting away from the whole argument, because you and I know you're probably not going to win that. It's just going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
And really they have a need. They either want attention, they want something physical, they want something, that's going to meet a need, and they're not getting it. That's why they're saying it's not fair. A lot of times, don't get caught up in the political, argument of fair versus unfair. I think trying to figure out what their needs are and see if you can meet their needs versus equal, which again, like I said, equal is just, sometimes parents try to be too equal all the time. We're just going to give it to this. Well, in some cases, that may not be meeting a need.
Right.
So you could give 50% of whatever that is to that child. The child still, doesn't either understand or needs haven't been met. So I think you have to be careful between the two.
Yeah, I can think of a real prime example. If you have multiple children, at some point, probably you're going to get one of them a phone. Everyone below them will feel like that is the latest possible age that they should ever get a phone. So let me just pick an age. Let's say it was 13 or whatever. Okay, so it's your first child, and you get them a phone at 12 or 13 years old. And then you got the ones below that coming up who are eyeing that and thinking, okay, when I'm 12 or 13, I'm getting a phone. Well, maybe you learned that it was a terrible idea to give a 12 or a 13-year-old a phone. And so you have to repent of that decision making.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just going to repeat it. Or another instance could be perhaps, let me say it was 14 or whatever. Perhaps the firstborn could handle it. They've shown the responsibility and they've shown the maturity, and, you've got plenty of parameters on. But maybe the next one doesn't. Or it could be flip-flop, where your younger one is much more mature than the firstborn. That's not normally the case, but it happens sometimes. And so realizing that equal is not a helpful parenting strategy if there are character issues that haven't been addressed. You're just glossing over and rewarding unfinished character when you just try to across the board make it equal all the time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head. Again, what you're talking about is each child is unique. And I think trying more and more and more through these type of life events to show them that they are unique. See, we're flipping this 180, right? Instead of them trying to be like their brother or sister, you're really teaching them that they are unique. And that even though right now it may not seem fair, but they have other unique things that are going to happen, and they're going to get things that the others may not get because they have unique, characteristics about them. So
yeah, I like
qualities.
That. Yeah. Plus, the baby gets everything. We all know that. Everybody complains about that. But so a couple of questions as we start to wrap up more. A couple of questions, kind of along the same stream of a child that just obsessively parents one of their siblings, or is just a hyper controller. I think those kind of go into the same category. Some. What do you do when, first off, it can be exhausting to you as a parent, but it's just really annoying to the other sibling when one is trying to hyper control them or overparent them, and sometimes that child then is long suffering until just it's World War II and they go nuts. Do you have any feedback for parents in that situation?
Yeah, I think, again, you're trying to bring balance back to the dynamic, right? So actually, instead of that child trying to control the other child, trying to get them, why are you trying to help them, right? There's a difference, because again, the selfishness comes back into play, right? So if I'm trying to make you do something, it's because I want something that may not be mine, or I don't think this is fair, or so they're trying to control it. So you can just kind of drop in and say, wait, hold on, Billy, are you trying to help your brother or your sister? What is it that you're trying to do? And it kind of gets them off kilter a little bit, and it gets them, kind of off of the I want, or whatever that controlling need is. So I think just redirecting them in that case. And then for the other child, that may, in some cases, the controlling is taking advantage of a very passive or quiet child, right? And so they become very bossy. Well, one of the other things that you can do is like you can raise up the other one a little bit more, saying, "Hey, what do you want to get involved, or what? Maybe you got something you want to tell your brother, or hey, let's do this together." Right. And so it's all about, to me, it's all about diffusing the situation. It's about changing the dynamic. On one hand, it might be taking a more active role with the controlling one and trying to ask him, what is he trying to help your brother with or your sister? On the other hand, it might be trying to raise up the more permissive and passive one and trying to get them more actively involved in whatever the activity is. So sometimes just changing, you're looking to change the dynamic, and you can do it from either end.
No, that's really helpful. I was sitting here thinking as you're talking, there could be an entire podcast called Sibling Rivalry, not an episode, but just a podcast, because the situations are endless that somebody may come on. Are there any particular resources that you have found to be more helpful for parents who are dealing with this on a more chronic basis?
No, not anyone in particular. I mean, I think when you look at any of the material out there, whether it's focused on the family life, these are short, websites you can go to. You just type in Sibling Rivalry, and they're going to give you great advice. There's not any one book that I would recommend. And sometimes I'll be honest with you, I do that because if it's one book and somebody gets something out of it, and then somebody looks at the book and they read through the whole book and they don't feel like they really got an answer, I'm always more of, hey, there's a lot of the resources out there. And so I would direct them toward the two that I just said, whether it's focused on the family or family life. And you've probably got some as well that you would recommend.
I would recommend. This podcast is actually a part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. So it's hosted on christianparenting.org in addition to letsparentonpurpose.com. And there's some great stuff there. Again, you go on, you type in Sibling Rivalry, and some of it's going to apply to you and some of it's not, because one of the encouraging things is that whatever you're going through, you're not the first person to have to deal with this situation in the home. But also every sibling, the personalities are unique, the situations are a bit unique. So I like that. The web is a great tool for that, because one size doesn't fit all in most of these situations. So Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I was wondering, would you care to close us out just by praying for, if moms and dads are still listening at this point in the episode, then they really probably have a challenge with sibling rivalry. Will you just pray for those listening that God would give them strength and wisdom for their journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Heavenly Father, thank you that we have a God that we can come to, and a God that meets all of our needs. And so I just ask that you would be reaching out in a mighty way to each of the parents that might be struggling with sibling rivalry, that they would know that you are a God that we can go to at any time, any day, and anywhere. We thank you for that. I just lift up each and every parent out there listening to this podcast. Give them a sense of peace, relief, and comfort, knowing that with you, that we can get through any situation. And I just ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brian.
Friend, if you're still listening all the way to the credits, then I hope that means that this was a particular blessing to you to hear this podcast. If so, I want to encourage you to share it with somebody else that you think might be helped by it. You're welcome to go to letsparentonpurpose.com to find out more information about show notes, about past issues, all kinds of things to help your family. And I do want to say that Let's Parent on Purpose is a user-supported podcast. And if you would like to be a part of that, you can go to letsparentonpurpose.com, learn how to be a supporter through Patreon or through a one-time gift. Thank you so much for listening. Again, share this with somebody that you know needs to hear it. Remember that parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. And we'll talk to you soon.